Thank you all for joining. So before we start, is there anyone who can actually confirm that they can see and both hear me before we start, just to make sure that I'm visible and hearable for everyone? If you could let me know in the chat or anything, that would be great. All good? All right, thank you. So thank you for joining this session. I'm proud to be back at the for the second time at the CloudEight event. I think this is their third edition. So happy to be back to present another topic, and this time related to Windows Virtual Desktop and security. So thank you for joining. And this title is actually, the title of the session is actually WD does not use port 3389, so we are secure, right? But hopefully and probably you've realized that that is not everything that you need to worry about in terms of security. So that's what we're going to take a look at. So we're going to take a look at what Microsoft already does in terms of security when it comes to Windows Virtual Desktop, what they are responsible for as part of the WD platform. But more importantly, we'll focus on what you can do as an organization, as a customer organization, or as a partner in order to get the right amount of security on top of your Windows Virtual Desktop. So we'll take a look at, you are actually also responsible for a lot of those security components. So quick introduction to myself. My name is Freek Bersson. I'm from the Netherlands. I primarily focus on, well, things around application and desktop delivery using remoting technologies. So this is Windows Virtual Desktop, but also all of the previous technologies like remote desktop services. You might have heard about Azure Remote App, which was there for a little bit of time. The terminal services and all kinds of technologies. I've been in this space for many years. It's what I enjoy doing as well. I've been a Microsoft MVP on this topic for many years as well. And well, I'm happy to be here to share some of my knowledge around this topic with you all today. So if you want to connect now or afterwards, my contact details are on the screen. So I'm happy to connect with you. Send me an invite, Twitter, email, LinkedIn, GitHub, that is all fine. Happy to talk about these and other topics some more if you want after the session as well. And I'll make sure to reshare these contact details at the last slide as well. So before we actually start, I want to do a quick thank you to all of our sponsors who make this event possible for all of us to join. So not only this session, but we have a lot of sessions. I think that there are 3 different tracks going on right now with a lot of content. So make sure to also catch the agenda and see some of the other sessions as well. So before we dive into the security topic, let's take a step back and real brief cover what the Windows Virtual Desktop service is, just to make sure that everyone is aware. You might have or have not heard about the service, but it is all about being able to publish both applications and desktops to an end user using a remoting protocol. So to make sure that the user has access to an application or a full desktop, regardless of the device, regardless of the location or the time that he wants to connect. So if you think about that, that's not new, right? We've been doing that for many years, for maybe 2 decades even, based on technologies like remote desktop services, terminal services, or maybe Citrix, VMware, all kinds of platforms that do similar technology. What makes WD a little bit different is that this is a full cloud service, a full public cloud service, as well as a lot of the components are now also being managed by Microsoft. So you have a reduction in times that you spend on managing all kinds of infrastructure components. We'll talk about those in a bit. But you really have the opportunity to shift focus and focus on what's really important, which is the end user experience and how that user actually perceives that end user experience. It also, of course, comes with a lot of simplified management in the Azure portal and in the Azure platform as well, because Windows Virtual Desktop is a first-party service. So there is, things like automation and Azure log analytics for collecting telemetry data and provisioning and load balancing, etc. That's all available as part of the Azure platform. So when it comes to architecture, and this is important because this will also be our transition into all of the security aspects and where you are responsible for in terms of security. But from the architecture standpoint, we have all of the components that are managed by Microsoft for us. So these are, first of all, of course, the Windows Virtual Desktop service components. So these are your connection brokering, gateway, web access, licensing, load balancing, all kinds of infrastructure components. These are all managed for you as part of the Windows Virtual Desktop service. So because that it's a full first-party Azure service, it also leverages all of the existing Azure infrastructure that we have available. So think about compute and storage and identity management and networking and all those components and infrastructure that is available. WVD leverages that because it's a full Azure platform. So all of the stuff on the right-hand side, you can consider that managed by Microsoft for you as part of the WVD service. What you then need to focus on is the stuff on the left-hand side. So this is actually where things are showing up in your subscription, and this is where you are responsible for. So first of all, these are, of course, the session host servers where the user logs on to connect to the application and connect to the desktops. These are IaaS virtual machines, and you need to manage and maintain those as well as part of using a Windows Virtual Desktop. And of course, that comes with a lot of other stuff as well, not just the virtual machines, but also things around image management, making sure that you have proper images with your application landscape in there, that you do profile management in order to have the user to roam his profile across multiple virtual machines, but also things like user density, VM sizing, scaling, and all kinds of properties that are needed for a fully functioning environment. So you can see that the stuff on the left-hand side, this is where your focus should change to in order to get a good user experience based on your user profiles, your personas, and your specific use case. So making a quick comparison between Windows Virtual Desktop and some of the previous platform, if you go all the way back to RDS, Remote Desktop Services on premises, which is still something you can do, by the way, and there are still scenarios that there is more of a good choice comparing it to others. But if you compare that to WVD, you are responsible for every step in that entire stack. So all the way down to the physical data center, all the way up to identity, that is your responsibility to manage and maintain and make sure that it's highly available and load balanced, etc. Then making the transition to remote desktop services on Azure, you can already see that Microsoft takes care of a lot of the physical components. So obviously the physical data centers, the Azure data centers, but also the networking and the physical virtualization hosts. And then making the transition to the latest evolution, the Windows Virtual Desktop platform, we can see that Microsoft now also takes care of the virtualization control plane. So this is that backplane that contains all of the infrastructure components. Remember the connection brokering, the web access, the gateway, and all kinds of infrastructure components. You don't need to worry about those anymore because those are now also being managed by Microsoft as part of the WVD service. So just to make sure that you are aware that you can really shift your focus towards what's really important, the application landscape and the perceived end user experience on top of this service. Taking the transition then to the security topic that we have today, where are your responsibilities and where are they shared with Microsoft? So the WVD service already comes with a lot of security aspects that Microsoft provides for you as part of the WVD service. So there's a clear responsibility in their hands as well in terms of the Windows Virtual Desktop service. And that is based on these components. So these components are actually managed by Microsoft for you, and they provide the proper security on top of these components for you. So think about, again, the web access, gateway, connection brokering, all of those infrastructure components that are needed to publish WVD desktops and applications, as well as things like diagnostics and extensibility components. So what do you need to worry about then on top of that, or in this case, underneath of there, is all of the components that are actually ending up in your Azure subscription. So these are your Azure virtual networks, right? So not only closing port 3389 as part of that, but also working with other open ports and Azure firewalls and network security groups, etc. As we'll see later on, WVD is also a full Azure AD authenticated service, so you can leverage things like conditional access and MFA, etc. So that's also your responsibility to make sure that that is properly secured, as well as the Active Directory domain services. So whether you choose Azure AD domain services or regular domain services, it is your responsibility to make sure that that is properly secured and that it is, well, confirming the security policy that you have as an organization. And then, of course, the Windows Virtual Desktop session hosts. So again, these are the virtual machines that the user logs onto to consume the application, consume the data, and consume the desktop. Those are your responsibility. Microsoft is not going to update those session hosts for you with new security updates or Windows updates, etc. So you are responsible to make sure that those session host servers are continuously maintained and have proper security in there as well. And lastly, of course, the Windows Virtual Desktop workspace in, well, more specific, but in more general way, all of the Windows Virtual Desktop components like workspaces, but also host pools and application groups, make sure that you have proper role-based access control on those components as well to provide the proper security to managing those environments for your administrators. So just to make sure that there's a clear distinction between what Microsoft is responsible for and what they already do versus the stuff that you are responsible for. So what does that mean then in terms of the full end-to-end security for Windows Virtual Desktop? And that is this diagram. So these are the 6 pillars, if you will, where all of the security aspects can be placed under, right? So it all starts obviously with the identity, making sure that the identity is secure, that the user has authorized access, that conditional access services apply, hopefully and probably MFA. We'll talk about that. And the data, of course. So as soon as the user logs on to the virtual desktop or the application, he actually has access to corporate data. So you want to make sure that that is secured as well. And we talked about the session host. So not only the Windows Virtual Desktop session host updates on those machines, but also things like Defender for Endpoint and antivirus, anti-malware, make sure that that is properly configured as well. And applications, right? So there's no reason to publish a desktop without an application. So your users will launch applications from there, make sure that they have access to the right amount of applications based on their authorization and based on their groups. We'll take a look at a couple of examples on that. And networking, right? So not only, again, that port 3389, but also things like service tags and Azure firewalls and network security groups. And lastly, infrastructure, the infrastructure bullet. So this is more on the common practices, the best practices, broader than only WVD, making sure that you are compliant to take a look at the security score that is available that provides you guidelines around optimizing your security, as well as the Azure Security Center. So these are just a couple of examples, bullets underneath, examples underneath these bullets. I'm actually going to take a look at some of these in this session. Obviously, we cannot cover them all. There's much more, in fact, than only the ones on the slide right now. But I'm going to share a good resource that you can leverage at the end of the session, which actually contains all of this information in greater detail as well. So be sure to stick around for that at the end of this session. Let's start with the first topic then, and dive into securing the identity. Obviously, that's the first thing to worry about, is making sure that the identity of the user is actually secure. So we already mentioned that the Windows Virtual Desktop platform is based on Azure AD, right? So it means that we can leverage all of the security components that also come with Azure AD, like conditional access, like MFA, and like many other features. So the first thing, you probably have guessed it by now, make sure that you do conditional access and do MFA on top of your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. This allows you to provide secure your identity and make sure that only the user and only the condition of the user that you allow has been allowed access to the Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. So how does conditional access work? If you're not less familiar with that, it gathers a couple of conditions, a couple of signals, like, for example, the user, the location where he's coming from, whether or not his device is trusted, or which application he launches. All of that information is gathered. And then you can either allow that user access, block that user from providing access, or require an additional, for example, MFA, an additional method of security, right? The second method. So that is the first advice I would give you, is actually enabling conditional access and also doing MFA to properly secure that identity. Also because you might be aware that the Windows Virtual Desktop client, at least the Windows client, also allows you to cache credentials on your local machine. That it does that in the local credential store, which is great because it optimizes and makes the logon experience a little bit better for the end user. But only for that reason alone, I would say enable conditional access, enable MFA to make sure that you also have a second form of authentication on top of Windows Virtual Desktop. So let's do actually a quick demo and take a look at how to configure that for the Windows Virtual Desktop environment. So I have already logged on to Azure here, and I already opened my Azure AD services and the security tab underneath there. And as you can see, I have access to conditional access here. And this is the place where I can define new security policies, new conditional access policies. There's a lot more to it than only for WVD, right? This is for many more things, but let's focus on the WVD side of things. So I already have a policy here, which is called Enforced MFA for WVD. So you might have guessed what it actually does. It does enforce MFA for all of our WVD connections. So how does it work? You basically start by selecting where it should apply to. In this case, I'm going to apply it to every user, but in most cases, you probably want to enforce it to a specific group or a group of people or a directory role or whatever you want to select. And then more importantly, you have to select the cloud application that you want to secure, in this case, Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, that might seem quite obvious, but if you actually set up this Cloud App Action and you search, for example, for Windows Virtual Desktop, you'll actually get more hits than you were probably were expecting, right? So the one to select here is the one that starts with 9CD, etc. as the ID. That's the one that you need to secure. The other ones are for other purposes, for web feeds and for there might be for the classic version of WVD that you might still have. But for any new one, I would select this one in order to properly secure that. And then you can select the condition. So in this case, I have selected that it applies to 2 different applications, but you can also have it apply to different platforms or locations or whatever you want to use. You can make this as complex as you want, basically. And then, of course, you need to decide what to do with that session. So remember that we had the opportunity to block it or to grant it or to require MFA. And that is what is being selected here. So we grant the user access, but we do require him to provide MFA for it. And of course, we have to then make sure that we have the proper signing frequency as well to make sure that the user is continuously asked for MFA as well. In the example, it's 8 hours, but do select the one that is, well, a good fit for your organization and your user base. So you might not want to set this to 1 hour and enforce MFA every hour on the WVD client, but make sure that you have a proper number there to continuously ask the user for MFA. So that was a quick overview of how to configure MFA for WVD. And you also see a yellow hyperlink in there. You're going to see that a lot throughout this session as well. That is additional information on how to set this up in more detail. So I am going to share the slide deck at the end of this session to also provide you with all of those URLs. So if you want to get started with one of these topics, make sure you follow those yellow hyperlinks. So the other thing is that not only securing the user identity and doing conditional access and MFA, but also I can advise you to start collecting and examining your audit logs, which provides you insight into which application was launched by which user, which location was he coming from, which WVD version of the client that he used, for example, but also which administrator made what change in the WVD configuration. So make sure that you collect all of those audit logs as part of your security implementation and that you examine them to make sure that there are no things happening that you do not want in your environment. And again, there's a link here with more in detailed information on how to set that up for WVD. So the next topic, then we covered the identity. The next obvious topic is securing the data. So as we said, the user logs on to an application, logs on to a desktop. You want to make sure that the corporate data that he accesses is properly secured. So whether that data is coming from OneDrive or maybe a map drive or a home folder, whatever you're using, make sure that you have, for example, let's take a look at disk encryption to make sure that the data that's probably also going to reside in Azure is properly secured. More specifically on the user side, you have the option to use AVAS profile containers. And I would really recommend to do that as part, especially as part of, for example, pooled scenarios of Windows Virtual Desktop, where the user actually can log on to multiple virtual machines throughout the week or the day, or it can end up on different machines, so making sure that the full user profile is captured and is available to make sure that the user has the same experience regardless of which server he's logging on to. Make sure that you have that configured as part of WVD. You don't need additional licensing for that, because AVAS is now part of Microsoft since a couple of years, and you can actually use that as part of the WVD service. So what does it mean? Real brief, it means that the entire user profile, so anything that you would store under user's username, is now stored into a single AVAS container, a single VHDX file, essentially, which is stored on a network share, which is mounted underneath the user session as soon as the user logs on. That means you have fast logon times, regardless of the size of the profile, that you eliminate a lot of the profile corruption errors that could occur. And it also works alongside with any other user environment management that you might have on top of Windows Virtual Desktop. So the location, and that's also important to realize, the location where these files are coming from, they can have a different location based on your needs and based on your environment. It can either be virtual machines, like an IaaS virtual machine with file services clustering on top of it, or Azure files or Azure NetApp files. So my general recommendation would be to either use Azure files or Azure NetApp files, because first of all, it eliminates the need of having to manage and maintain new virtual machines with file services and clustering and all of those components. But also the Azure files and the Azure NetApp files comes with a lot of ISO certifications as well, in terms of security, to making sure that that is properly secured as well. So again, there's a hyperlink here if you want to get started with creating file shares. Also take a look at the security aspect of properly doing the NTFS and the share permissions as part of that as well. So we covered the user data, we covered the user's identity. Next will be the user applications, right? So you will probably have a Microsoft 365 applications apps in enterprise as part of WVD as well. So in most cases, that is the most common application published inside WVD, because you're maybe publishing a full desktop with the entire Office suite in there, or you might have third-party applications that need export capabilities to Excel or to Word or whatever. So it's a very common application. So there is actually a security policy advisor available specifically for all of your M365 applications. So this is not WVD specific, but I do want to highlight that you can also apply that to Windows Virtual Desktop and these applications inside those published apps and desktops. Secondly, and that's more of a generic one, you can implement a technology called App Locker. And this is not something that's new. In fact, it has been there for many, many years. It's not related to WVD either, but it does allow you to prevent access to a specific application for a specific group of users. So you can have a single image and have a specific application not be available for a specific group of people based on their group membership, etc. But also making sure that you do that based on file attributes. So you might want to block specific products or file names or version of the executable, etc. It's a great technology, and it allows you to simply present an access denied to the end user as soon as he accesses an application that you do not want. The one that I actually want to highlight some more is application masking. So you might already be familiar with App Locker. That's a technology that's been out there for many, many years. Application masking is not so much a technology that people know about. It's actually part of the AVAS suite as well. And it allows you to, comparing it to App Locker, where you can basically have the access denied be presented upon opening a specific executable, a specific file, or a specific version of the file. That's not so much user-friendly, right? So application masking is able to entirely mask an application for a specific user group. So making it entirely invisible, that is. And it's actually, well, it's not a full security solution, I would say. It's not, I don't think it was intended as a security option, but you could actually use it to prevent access to a specific application as part of your security implementation. And actually, I want to show that in a demo, also because that's one of the more fun demos to show, comparing it to AppLocker. So here I have two different sessions. The one on the left, the purple or pink one, that's my administrator. The one on the right, WD Ninja one, that's my end user. And if I go to the task manager here, you can see that both users are logged on to the same virtual machine. This is a Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session virtual machine where both the administrator and the user are logged on, obviously for demo purposes, showing them side by side. So as you can see, I, as an end user, have all kinds of different applications available that are available inside this template image, including the entire Office suite here, which again, you know, is the #1 application probably that's being published in WVD. But let's, for this scenario, assume that we want to hide the entire Microsoft 365 Enterprise application stack for the user on the right. So if I would go in as an end user right now, and if I go to the console panel, I can actually see that the Office application, the Office Pro Plus, is actually installed, which makes sense because we can see the icons here. Actually, you can open all of these applications, start using them, and also have file type association available, obviously linking these extensions to the Office suite. So let's go ahead and actually hide this application on the fly for this end user, just because that's fun to see. You probably will not do this to the end user during production, unless you really hate the user. But let's actually go ahead and do that. So before we actually do that, let me quickly show you how to configure these files. What I have here is the FSLogix apps rule editor. And this allows me, with a wizard-driven procedure, to create a rule specific for an application I want to hide. In this case, the Office, the entire Office suite, containing of a lot of registry entries that it automatically gathered, as well as file locations, etc. So the end result of that wizard, if you run through that, are two different files. We have the FXA, which is an assignment file. This allows me to assign it to a specific group, in this case, the user on the right, as well as an FXR file, which is the rule file containing the actual rules of the applications I want to hide. So let's actually go ahead and emulate that. So let's go ahead and copy these files and place them into the rules extension folder where the agent is constantly polling to see if they're new files. So watch the icons on the right-hand side as I actually copy these files in. Within a second or two, these rules now make sure that the application is entirely masked for the end user. So now I can actually try to open, and it says, well, I do not have Word available. It's not being found on the system. And if I would open up a Word file, in this case a docx, it will say, well, I don't have Word, so what do you want to open this file with? More interesting, also, if I go to the console panel and actually refresh that here, you can see that the entire Office application is now fully masked to the end user. So in the start menu, on the desktop, on file type association, the entire application is now gone. The thing is if I log on to another user, in this case the administrator, but it can also be another user, we still have access and we still have Office available. I can refresh here and the Office application is still there, right? So this allows you to secure applications and provide masking on top of applications to hide specific applications for one user and provide them to another. I want to show you in regards to application masking. And again, there is a link here with a tutorial on how to get started with application masking. And just to make that sure, that's not specific for the M365 applications. That's also for any other third-party app you want to include in there. So switching topics again, so we talked about applications, we talked about the data and identity. There's actually a fun new feature introduced a couple of weeks or months back, which allows you to prevent taking screenshots of your WVD session. And the first question I always get is, yeah, but I can still take a screen capture of photo with my phone, for example, for the screen. Sure, we're not going to prevent that, but this is just another security method you can do on top of WVD, actually preventing user to take a screenshot of the WVD session. So here you see that in action where I have two sessions open. The one above here doesn't have that configured to secure it. The one here does, and we're actually not seeing that. So if I take a screenshot, whether that's Snagit or screen capture or whatever you're using, it just doesn't show up. So it's a fun thing that they added as part of the security stack in there. So we talked about identities, applications, data. Let's also take a look at the operating system, because recall that you are also responsible for that. You want to make sure that the operating system is also up to date all of the time, right? So a good way of doing that would be the Azure Image Builder, which is an automated sequence which allows you to provide the source, the customizer, and the distribute, and the end result will actually be a new template image with the new Windows updates in there. So this is comparing it to a traditional way where you might want to spin up a new virtual machine, treat that as your template image, install all of your applications, sysprep that, shut it down, turn it into a template image, and all those manual steps. Azure Image Builder actually automates all of those steps for you. So how does that work? We define the source of the template, which can actually be any version, but most likely Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session, a specific version. We can then specify the customizer steps, which is in most cases a PowerShell extension, which installs my applications, for example, my OneDrive, my Teams, or all other third-party applications as part of the customizer step. And in the third step, you can actually define the distribute phase. So this is where we define what the end result of this process should be. It can either be a VHD file, but in most cases for WD, it will probably be a managed image, or more preferably part of a shared image gallery, which allows you to literally build up a gallery of different image versions and also do versioning on top of that as well. So I actually wanted to show you a quick demo of how to get started with that. And we're actually not going to go into the Azure portal for this one, but we're going to do VS Code. So you might be aware that all of the components of WD can also be managed and distributed and configured and deployed using infrastructure as code, using ARM templates previously, but also now using Bicep templates, which is a great new technology. I can really encourage you to take a look at that. We don't have time to cover all of those Bicep technologies, although I really love the technology, but let's focus on the way to actually create a template image for our Azure Image Builder sequence. So I have a Bicep file here that contains a couple of parameters, which allows me to customize this deployment to my needs. And here I have the definition, the resource definition of the template image that I'm going to create. What I want to show you is the 3 different steps that are in here that have the source, the customize, and the distribution. So this is the point where I actually define the publisher, the author, the SKU, and the version of the template image I want to use as the source. And then second, I have, in this case, only one, but you can have multiple ones, a customizer step, which is a PowerShell customization, which literally goes and download a specific PS1 file, which contains all of my customizer steps. So in this case, installing Teams and OneDrive and Notepad++ and all kinds of other applications. And then the last step is making sure that the Windows updates are in there. So this is obviously for security purposes, making sure that we have the latest security, the latest Windows updates in there. And by the way, we're also going to exclude, in this case, any preview update or preview Windows update that might also occur. And then the last step is the distribute step. And this allows me to define what the end result is going to be. In this case, it's going to be a shared image, gallery image in Azure. So let's actually go ahead into the Azure portal now and take a look at what that looks like when you have deployed that. So I have a second resource group here, which is my template image resource group, contains a couple of components that I need for my Azure Image Builder sequence. So we have our managed identity, our definitions, and our templates. So here's a template that actually was created by that Bicep deployment, which contains, in this case, an image version. So let's go ahead into the shared image gallery and actually see what that looks like. So we have an image definition here, also created by Bicep. And inside that image definition, I have, in this case, only one, but in production, obviously more, an image version available, which allows me to have the latest image version with the latest Windows updates in there. So eventually, as part of your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment, and again, that can be using the Azure portal, using ARM templates, or using any ecosystem partner like Nerdio or other great tools that have that as well, it allows you to pick up that image and simply point to the latest Azure, to the latest shared image gallery, and just say, grab the latest image from this gallery and deploy that as part of my host pool or expand my host pool using that template or replace my host pool VMs as part of that latest version. So when it comes to making sure that you have updates for those versions for Windows, for the OS, and maybe any inbox applications, make sure that you take a look at automated ways of doing it in order to prevent you from having to do that manually, which will probably result in doing it less and less. So make sure that you use the proper automation tools for that as well. And then that brings us to the actual session host. So once we have taken that template and we have deployed that into our WD environment, there's also ways to further lock down the session host based, for example, on lockdown policies. So make sure that you understand that in most cases, you'll probably do a pooled deployment of Windows Virtual Desktop where multiple users at the same time log on into the same VM. So you want to make sure that you prevent users from taking a look at each other's data or shutting down the VM or all kinds of other weird scenarios. So make sure that you lock down those session host servers using the method that you want, whether that's GPO preferences, a third-party solution, or maybe on later MEM or Intune support for Windows 10 multi-session. And just a couple of examples of the things that you could do, like disabling specific device redirections, restricting access to Windows Explorer, the command prompt, or control panel. Just a couple of examples of there's obviously a lot more to it when it comes to properly locking down a session host. And of course, besides that, also, probably you're aware of that, but leverage things like Defender for Endpoint and Endpoint Manager in order to further secure those session host servers. Make sure that you also get notifications on when there is something going on in your security. Endpoint Manager is now also added as part of a allowed option for multi-session Windows 10 VMs as well. So again, 2 articles, 2 links here to have more in-depth knowledge about how to implement both Defender for Endpoint as well as Endpoint Manager. And then we get to that network access. So at the beginning, we had that statement about the port 3389, whether that's because we do not need that anymore or secure. This is actually an overview of the user connecting to the Windows Virtual Desktop servers, just to give you an idea of which steps are being taken by the end user and by the platform. So step number 1 is actually the user authenticated against that Azure AD. So again, this is where Azure AD conditional access and hopefully MFA is going to apply. And then in the second step, the user is going to see an overview of the desktops and applications that are assigned to him based on his membership and based on the app group membership. And in step number 3, he actually selects one of those applications or desktops he wants to leverage at that point. And then the connection breaker makes sure to orchestrate a connection from the selected session host server based on load balancing and all kinds of other things to make sure that the connection is made back to the gateway server. And then in step number 5, we have the session running. So the thing you'll notice here is that step number 4 is actually the connection broker telling the session host server to make an outbound connection back to the gateway servers as part of this deployment. That means that we can entirely shut down the firewall and close the firewall in front of our session host servers because we do not need any inbound ports anymore, which is great because that's another added security layer on top of Windows Virtual Desktop. Technology is actually called Reverse Connect, so that makes sure that the agent that's installed on the session host servers as part of your deployment not only has the RDP TCP stack, but also the side-by-side stack added on top of that as part of the Reverse Connect option, making sure that that agent only requires an outbound port back to the WD backplane components. On top of that, you can also use service stacks to further secure those VMs as well, to make sure that the proper ports are open. That's a couple of addresses that agents need to properly be configured. And there's a great tool also available, recently announced, with the WD Agent URL tool, which provides you with a great overview of which ports are successfully accessed and which are not. So you can run that on a session host server to get an idea of how you are doing in terms of the correct ports that are open. So I can encourage you to also put that in your toolbox as part of your WD deployments. And lastly, in this area, of course, Azure Firewall. So if you are an organization who also wants to monitor any outbound traffic going to the outside from the session host server, for example, if you are publishing a full desktop, including browser traffic and all kinds of other applications that access data or access services outside of your network, you can use Azure Firewall as your outbound traffic monitor and outbound traffic secure method as well. There's a great guide in there to also configure that specifically for Windows Virtual Desktop. So again, there's more information in there on how to set that up and how to maintain that. So one of the last topics I want to cover, taking a quick look at the time, we have a couple of minutes left, is Azure security best practices. So this is not 100% dedicated to WVD, but is to make sure that you are aware that you can also do secure score on top of your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment and get feedback on how you did in terms of common practices, best practices when it comes to security. On top of that, there's the second bullet. There's something out there that's called WVD Insights as well, which allows you to gather telemetry data about your Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. So you can configure it to collect telemetry data about the session host servers themselves, about event logs, about performance counters that take place that you want to include in there, but also any diagnostic information from the WVD service itself. You can all gather that into a single log in Linux database, and I can really encourage you to do that. It provides you a lot of telemetry data about which user logged on, which application was launched, how long was the average log on time, and all kinds of other statistics and diagrams. And also on top of that, you can also use Azure Sentinel to also investigate all of those logs that you might have gathered, maybe include that with Defender endpoint alerts to get a good overview of the security, and have the Azure Sentinel make sure that you have insights into what's happening there. And lastly, on this slide is also the Azure Security Baseline. So there's a huge document in there. This is the link to that document. On the right-hand side, you see a screenshot of different topics that are discussed in that baseline. It contains a lot of information about properly securing WVD and providing a baseline and some of the best practices for WVD as well. So I can encourage you to also take a look at that. Last thing, I actually added this recently because it recently came out, is the enterprise scale construction set. Now, it's not my intention for you to actually be able to read this diagram, but just to show you that it's a pretty roughly and pretty complex diagram with a lot of details on there. On a positive note, I mean that. And I want to make sure that you are aware of that. That's available. So it contains a lot of common practices, best practices, not only for security, but also around identity and management and connections, etc. Be sure to check that out, especially if you have larger enterprise WVD deployments, where also things like disaster recovery and complex security scenarios take place. So there's a great document available, including this architecture, but a lot of guidance text in there as well. So make sure you check that out. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I actually want to leave you with a call to action. So if you, hopefully you enjoyed the content of this session, you hopefully picked up on some of the things you want to implement as part of your WVD deployment. I realized that I went quite fast. That is because I wanted to show you a lot of stuff around security as well. And we did not even cover everything yet. So there is a security handbook available, and full disclosure, I actually wrote that handbook, but I want to show you that this handbook actually contains all of the topics that we just discussed in the last 40 minutes, including a lot more information and a lot of other security aspects as well. So it's available. It's a free ebook to download. This is the link to that. And well, if you want to have more information about all of the stuff that we just covered, make sure you download that and get that as your free asset in terms of well, getting proper security for your WVD environment. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Again, I hope this was valuable content to you. If you want to leave some feedback, please use the chat window for that. I'm happy to take that feedback. If you enjoyed it or you wanted to see something else, please let me know. Happy to hear about that. And again, if you want to connect now or afterwards, feel free to do so. My contact details are on the slide, Twitter, email. That is all fine. And well, I hope you are going to stick around for the rest of the day as well. We have some great other sessions coming up. I'm actually going to attend some of those as well myself. So with that, thank you for your attention. I hope you have a great day. And well, until the next meeting. Thank you.